Good morning and welcome to Downtown Download, a COVID Resources and Recovery webinar. It's put on by the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore with our infamous Councilman Costello. We thank you for joining us today. Just a sort of high level what we're going to cover today. We have some amazing guests. We have from the 40th District, representing the 40th District, Senator Antonio Hayes. He'll bring us some great information about what's happening at the state level. And then we have one of our renowned restaurant owners, Phil Hahn, who will also be with us today. And so take a look at the panelists. We'll get to them in a minute. First, I'd like to just give you a couple updates on what's been happening at Downtown Partnership. Of course, our operations team, which is our staple, they are out on the streets. What we've done that's been really effective is we've shifted to more of a sort of hot area strategy, where we're really targeting areas where we know that there may be safety issues, there may be cleanliness issues, and so that strategy has been very effective in really making sure we minimize the effects of that. We've also made sure that as we do that, for you, for our partners, our team members, that they know they can reach out to us and let us know, excuse me, they can let us know where other areas are. And so please continue to do that. That's been pretty successful with us. Please send send your comments, your areas to info@godowntownbaltimore.com. So for all of that, please continue to do that. We'll put the links in the chat so that you have that. Additionally, in case you get on late, somebody else comes on late, you want to send this to a friend, we do share this recording after. And so we welcome you to come back, take a look at all of that. We do have at Downtown Partnership a couple things that we want to update you on. Please continue to go to our website and you can see all of the initiatives. I won't take you through everything that we have, but something that's new for us, we are seeking consumer sentiment data. And this is to help assist downtown businesses with reopening once the mayor lifts the stay-at-home order. And this survey is short. It's 12 questions, takes just a minute or two to fill out. But we really want to make sure that as we make recommendations, as we advocate, as we do all of that, that we're doing it with data in mind and your data in mind. So the link will be shared for the webinar participants all in the chat box. Please go to godowntownbaltimore.com. You'll see it there. It's also on our Facebook page and Instagram channels today. So you'll be able to see that. And one last thing I want to give a highlight on that's really been successful with us. We did a partnership with Harbor Park Garage called Heart of the Park. And in this partnership, we're able to provide up to 250 meals a day during lunchtime to people who need it. And if you don't need and you want to donate for somebody else who will, please do. This has been extremely successful. When people come, they get a meal that they can take and have then and a meal that they could take with them. And so it's been really successful. Our way of making sure that we're able to pay it forward and support each other as a community. One thing that we know is it's gonna take all of us together to get through this. So I'm gonna shift it almost to my partner in crime, Councilman Costello, and I'll transition it with just giving a little bit of update on the task force. As you know, the mayor asked both he and I to co-chair his COVID-19 Small Business Recovery Task Force, made up of a number of members. And the goal of this task force is really to combine all of the data assets and figure out how and when we recover together. And so our information that I talked about from the poll will be helpful in filling that. The task force has really honed in on areas of need, which is part of how we're here with our guests today. But our first task force meeting focused on tourism. We know that area is hit pretty hard. And our second one, we really heard from some of the restaurant owners as well. And so as we look to shape all of this, we want to make sure that we're doing it with as much information, as much thoughtfulness, as much intention and boldness. We know that some of that is going to have to come for this as well. And so the task force meets every other Thursday. Those meetings are open to the public, and that information is available on the mayor's office on the city's website. So with that, I will transition it to you, Councilman, if you will take it over from there. And if you could update them on the other part of that, which is that $5.5 million fund, I think that would be helpful. think you're on mute.
Thanks, Shalonda. Appreciate the assist on the mute as well. So yeah, we have a $5.5 million package. I wanted to give a brief update on that. $3.5 million of that is going towards small grants to small businesses in the city. There's a max grant award of $15,000. The application period closed this past Friday. BDC expects to be able to quickly make awards. As previously discussed, we're hoping that the focus is going to be on kind of those small anchor businesses in neighborhoods that are really, the cornerstone of the neighborhood. Barbershops, salons, dry cleaners, a restaurant, a coffee shop, etc. With a focus on businesses that weren't eligible for previous funding through the federal or state government. That could be because the owner has a felony on their record. It could be because the owner's an immigrant, or a variety of other reasons that they didn't qualify. So right now we've certainly exceeded the amount of money available in terms of asks. We don't think that it's going to be spread out evenly across everyone. So it is going to be awarded based on certain criteria that BDC has come up with, but please keep an eye out for that. We should see those awards soon. Then on the PPE piece, so the city has been moving forward, has been procuring from our local makers and manufacturers. As I mentioned last week, we made our first couple of awards, including a group, Citywide Youth Development, led by Rashid Aziz, that many of us are familiar with. In addition, there was $100,000 that was set aside for grants to these small makers and manufacturers to be able to help transition their business models. That application period closed on May 8th, and those awards are getting ready to be announced this week. So we're really excited about that. I believe there's 10 different entities that are getting a piece of that $100,000. And then finally, we have the Designing by Distancing initiative. So that's $1.5 million that's set aside for BDC to work with the Neighborhood Design Center. And, they're doing some great work already, figuring out how to create parklets, how to remove, existing parking spaces and replace those with outdoor seating, empowering some of those neighborhoods to get, outdoor folding chairs, tables, umbrellas, canopies, tents, signage around COVID-19, best practices, et cetera, and help in promoting their business districts. So that's moving along. That's really the last piece. And I think that we will see action on that, even though there's design work going on in the background once the governor gets to phase 2. So I'll include a couple links with information on that, as well as the governor's reopening plan. On the city side of things, only one thing I'd like to point out from the last week, and that is the governor moved to phase 1 or stage 1 of his reopening plan. He announced that on Wednesday it was effective Friday evening at 5 p.m. As many of you heard, Mayor Young kept the stay-at-home order in place based on the guidance that he's receiving from health professionals, including the health commissioner. I would point out that there's really not much difference between the two of those. And again, I'll post the links once we get out of the briefing mode here with the presentation so that folks can check that out and take a look. The last thing I wanted to touch on is voting. So we started to receive ballots this week in Baltimore City. I was incredibly excited to receive mine yesterday. A couple things, there's a set of instructions in there from the Board of Elections. Please be sure that you read those instructions very carefully. Number 2, there's an oath on the back of the envelope. You must fill that out, otherwise your vote will not be counted. The date on the ballot is going to say April 28th. That is not the correct date. It is June 2nd. Please note that if you have a ballot that says April 28th, that's the valid ballot for this election. They weren't able to print up these with the correct dates and time, so still fill it out. And you have to make sure that your ballot is postmarked by no later than June 2nd. So you want to get that in as early as you can. And that's pretty much it for voting. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Shalonda, before we go to our first special guest.
No, which is great. Thank you so much, Councilman. I would just let everybody know, if you have questions, please put your questions in the Q&A box. We'd like to get as many as we can in this webinar. If we cannot get to all of them throughout the webinar, we will make sure that the responses are provided after that. And so please put your questions in the Q&A box. We are sharing links for everything in the chat box, but as a reminder, this will also be provided after. So thank you so much for everybody who's starting to do that. And Councilman, if we want to turn it over to your session with the Senator, that would be wonderful.
Thanks a lot, Shalonda. And I just posted the first set of links. That's a link to Governor Hogan's executive order, a link to Mayor Young's executive order, interpretive guidance for Mayor Young's executive order, and then the 3 stages of the reopening plan. And one last thing before we get to our special guest, I want to point out that just because the city and the state are not in sync right now, that is not concern, because at a later date we could be at the same place. What we do know is that the city will never be ahead of where the state is because of the executive orders and proclamations that the governor's put in place. I know a lot of people are concerned about that. They're saying, well, we're 2 weeks behind now. When the governor reopens restaurants, we're probably going to be 2 weeks behind then. That's not necessarily the case. We know that the mayor is going to act according to what the health professionals are telling him. And I think we're all confident that the situation is slowly improving, not at the speed with which we would like, but the situation is getting better and we are getting closer to reopening. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our special guest, a good friend of mine, a board member at Downtown Partnership, Senator Antonio Hayes from the 40th District. Senator, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me this morning, Councilman. Thank you to the Downtown Partnership for providing this opportunity to talk to so many of our constituent organizations throughout Baltimore City.
Absolutely. So, Senator, I'm going to jump right into it. One of the big topics of concern has been unemployment insurance. We heard from someone from Department of Labor, I think 6 or 7 weeks ago, that in a 2-week period, they received the same number of inquiries that they did the entire calendar year of 2019. So we know that the folks at Department of Labor are completely overwhelmed. You're a member of the Senate Finance Committee, and your committee held an oversight hearing on unemployment insurance last week. And I think it was something like a 13-and-a-half-hour hearing. Something like 900 different people had signed up to testify. Can you talk a little bit about what you heard during that hearing, what your takeaways were, and kind of where we're going from here?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I am in a unique position in that I'm the only Baltimore City state senator that serve on Senate Finance. And so a lot of the issues that are affecting Baltimore City residents, businesses, or whatever, and things that come out of the mayor's office usually fall on my plate. Last week, we did a joint committee in Senate Finance with the Budget and Tax Committee to talk about unemployment and the issues that resulted there. Both committees has since then drafted a full letter outlining all of the different areas of concern that came up. Part of the biggest problem that I think came from some very powerful testimony from Marylanders all over the place was that the Department of Labor tried to design and implement at the same time a new system, which caused a lot of our citizens to not have the access to information or the processing of their applications to get the unemployment insurance that they needed while they were not working. And so we're working aggressively, although we adjourned in March of this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. All of our committees, our legislative committees, are performing our very important role of oversight to the various state agencies and committees to make sure that government is working for the folks that we hope to have impacted. And obviously, this is unprecedented times. There's a lot of concerns that have been raised that would not otherwise be considered. And so we're moving forward. Today, we're going to have another briefing. And so I think all of the legislative committees are gearing up to make sure that their oversight is provided to state government.
Thanks, Senator. And where do you see things going in terms of the issues with unemployment insurance? Do you think they're headed on the right track after that hearing? do you think we'll see improvement in the near future?
Absolutely. So I've already noticed, I get on average anywhere from 30 to 50 emails a day from various constituents that have experienced difficulties dealing with unemployment insurance. And this is highly irregular during the interim term when we're actually not in session. But the vast majority of emails and correspondence that we receive is related to uninsurance. I believe the oversight.
Hey, Shalonda, did Senator Hayes?
Doing right. I'm sorry about that. I was interrupted by a phone call on my iPad here. I just muted it. But no, I think there's been a lot of attention to this. Thank you to our media partners who really, echoed the voices of a lot of concerned citizens. Our committee is paying close attention and looking at some of our oversight capacity and holding those agencies accountable to make sure people get served. And so I predict that things are getting better. And the department is ramping up with more staff and things of that nature.
That's certainly good to hear. And Senator, I know you mentioned that there's going to be another hearing today. My understanding is that your committee, the Senate Finance Committee, is going to have the Maryland Insurance Administration, and they're going to be talking about some liability issues for private businesses, as well as banks and insurance companies. Folks may not know the Senate Finance Committee is responsible for oversight of insurance and banking and other private sector financial matters in the state. And I think that'd be something of interest to our audience today. If you could talk a little bit about what you expect to come out of that hearing, give some information for folks who are interested in listening in or testifying, and where you see things going.
Absolutely. And so as a part of our legislative role today at 1 o'clock, you could go to the Maryland General website, and I will put in the chat here a link to go to for folks. But there will be no public testimony, but we will hear from the Department of Labor. The Secretary, Tiffany Robinson, will be presenting. The Commissioner on Financial Regulation, Antonio Salazar. Also, the Maryland Insurance Administration Commissioner will be presenting, as well as the Maryland Bankers Association, because a lot of the concerns around, how has the banking industry responded to this pandemic? And especially for this audience, there's a couple of things that I think would be of importance to note. One of the things that the MIA has issued guidance on around personal insurance. Typically, when you are using your own vehicle, there's certain exclusions that's in your policy that prevents you from using your personal vehicle for business use or something of that matter. They've actually extended that. A lot of the restaurants, as you know, are going to more delivery, and people are using their personal cars. And so they've extended the policy for the use of your own personal auto insurance to make sure that you have some type of coverage. I know a lot of people was concerned about employees of theirs the possibility of employees being covered by workers filing workers' comp complaints as it relates to getting COVID on a job. I think the Maryland Insurance Administration is putting out guidance that that's something that doesn't qualify for workers' comp, and I think they'll speak to that more this afternoon and at 1 o'clock. Also, as it relates to health insurance, there has been some guidance put out requiring insurers to cover COVID-19 testing. That's just the testing portion with no copays. And the burdens of that testing and the coverage is really on the insurers as opposed to the split. Another really, really important thing, and I think, during the interim, we have a lot of briefings and conversations about various things affecting Marylanders. This better prepare us so when we do go in session, that we have all the information that we have from our various constituency groups and people that are impacted by the various policies and legislation that's out there. One of the things that I'm predicting that where there will be legislation in the next upcoming legislative session, I would encourage anyone who is interested in this area to reach out to your state legislators in this regard. A lot of times in business insurance, there's a clause for business interruption. In Maryland, it's excluded, whereas you're not covered in the cases of a pandemic. Some states have looked at this legislation and looked to expand it, especially as a result of COVID-19, to look at expanding that coverage as far as business interruption and business loss to include pandemic. And so I would foresee in the very near future that there will be legislation introduced to cover this. This is something that we haven't really experienced here in Maryland, but I know a lot of legislators and a lot of businesses are looking at possible legislation to be introduced in this upcoming session to help deal with the loss that they're experiencing during this epidemic.
Thanks, Senator. And speaking of upcoming sessions and legislation, this past session, you were the sponsor of a pretty robust piece of legislation around public safety. We know that's something that's of concern in downtown and frankly across every single neighborhood in our city. That legislation would have done a number of things. Would have given state police support to the Baltimore Police Department, who we know has well-documented shortages. Would have done some civilianization with the BPD officers that are at DJS, and done some other specific support mechanisms within the community. Can you talk a little bit about how important that legislation was and what the process is moving forward in terms of whether or not that veto will be overridden by the General Assembly?
Absolutely. And as you know, Councilman, and someone in the audience may know, prior to serving in an elected capacity, I actually served the city of Baltimore as assistant deputy mayor. And one of the issues that I dealt with wholeheartedly was public safety. Some of the strategies that we used in the years of 2007 to 2010 led to some of the lowest murder rates and shootings here in the city of Baltimore. But at that time, it was really because we had a true partnership, not just here in local government with the local players like the Baltimore City Police Department, State Attorney, and others, but we had a true partnership at the state level. This piece of legislation required state agencies to pretty much get their head in the game and be a true partner and help out the city, requiring state police to help assist their police officers, and especially when they deal with some of the traffic cops. One of the things that we definitely, and I hear from constituents all the time, we need to have more cops on the street. We need to have more foot patrol. We have about 30 fully sworn Baltimore City police officers right now over at the Juvenile Booking Center doing fingerprinting and taking photos of juveniles coming into that facility. Returning those 30 Baltimore City fully sworn weapon carrying officers to our streets are so important. This legislation required the Department of Juvenile Service to come up with a plan to civilianize the Department of Juvenile Services, just like we do for adults. Currently, the individuals that process adults who are arrested are civilians. They're not fully sworn police officers. We need police officers back on our street. And so this legislation really puts some mandates that the state government actually help us in the crime fight here in Baltimore City, as well as empowering some of those community members. It created a program where we were to hire at least 10 people from those impacted communities to develop strategies in their communities to help sustain public safety in their own neighborhoods. The governor, unfortunately, vetoed this piece of legislation along with Kerwin and HBCUs and other really important legislation, not just to Baltimore City, but to all Marylanders. The disappointing part about vetoing the PROTECT Act, which was a great piece of public safety legislation to really deal with the crime fight, in his official response, he essentially said, because the legislature did not pass some of the proposals that he had proposed, as far as increased sentencing, that he would not see the commitment that the state be a true partner in making sure that we address crime and public safety in the city. Unfortunately, when we're in an interim status, we cannot pass any legislation or override any legislation. It will require the next time we come back into session to bring this up in consideration to override along with other things. And hopefully by then we'll have a better idea of balancing all the different competing priorities around our economic environment here in the state. But we all know that public safety is of the utmost concern, and any help that we could get here in the city to address those issues are important to all of us here in Maryland, and especially here in Baltimore City.
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate that update and certainly appreciate the expertise that you bring to the table on that, and appreciate you keeping up the good fight on the public safety front. I want to shift a little bit over to something that we've been talking about the past couple of weeks, and we touched on briefly at the beginning this morning, reopening. There's been a lot of discussion over what Hogan is going to do in terms of his executive order, his 3-phase plan, and just wanted to get your perspective on where things are at and where you see things going.
Right. We've had, in addition to representing the 40th District, I also chair the Baltimore City Senate Delegation Chair. And so in that role, it's my responsibility to show some leadership towards all 6 of the state senators that represent Baltimore City. And so we've had various briefings with various health professionals. We've had a couple of briefings with some of our most influential and efficient organizations like University of Maryland and Hopkins and other LifeBridge and some other health professionals. I think as far as reopening, here's part of the problem. We never know what the governor is going to propose until it ends up, there's a press conference or the papers. And so it doesn't give us a lot of time to prepare. But tomorrow at 1 o'clock, there's actually going to be a joint committee hearing from leadership, both our president over in the Senate, Senator Bill Ferguson, as well as Delegate Adrian Jones, who's Speaker of the House, in reference to COVID-19 and our response. I think there's a lot of concern about when is the right time, and also what measures will be in place and what precautions we'll have to take as we open the doors and prepare back for businesses. There, I would imagine in the reopening plan, there will have to be some consideration given to social distancing, even as businesses open. How do we achieve that? Are going to be some of the questions. How fast? There's a lot of agencies that serve members of the public where their staff aren't actually in the office. How soon do we open up the offices back to the public, and what does that look like? And so we're closely monitoring this. Hopefully a lot will be revealed to us tomorrow in our oversight committee of the Joint Committee on the COVID-19 response. But we're closely monitoring and seeing how it will have effect on Marylanders and institutions throughout the state of Maryland.
Thanks a lot, Senator. That's very helpful. And just as we think about reopening and what some of the struggles that our small business community is going through, I wanted to turn it over to our other special guest, Phil Hahn. Phil, who many of us on this call know, is the owner of Doobies, Sugar Vale, Nuna's. I don't think I left anything out, but please correct me if I did, Phil. If you could just kick things off and just give a general overview of what some of the challenges are that you've been facing and some of your general concerns, and then we'll get into some more specific questions. Phil, if you could take it away.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So we also operate Bonfresco, the cafe downtown, and then a few stalls over at the newly renovated Broadway Market in Fells Point. So there are some challenges that are certainly universal. Not having dine-in guests is very challenging for any restaurant or bar. And then some challenges that are certainly more unique to the specific concept or the neighborhood. For example, a cafe downtown makes a ton of sense when you're at 100% capacity of office tenants. But in this scenario where we're in Hogan's phase 1, but also a stay-at-home order in Baltimore City, it's a complete ghost town in downtown. And I think case in point, you guys are all at home and not in any of the offices downtown, which on the upside is a breeze to drive around the city if you had to, because there's finally no traffic. But at the same point, it is very challenging, particularly, representing the restaurant landscape, to operate in this climate. Yeah, so why don't we jump into some of your specific questions?
Thanks, Phil. That's very helpful. And one of the things that we continue to hear from restaurants, because we know that when Hogan reopens things, when we get to stage 2, we're likely going to see a reduction in the max capacity inside of restaurants. So we could be looking at a maximum capacity of 25 or 30%, which certainly puts you all in a very challenging position in not being able to bring in the revenue that you were bringing in before. So one of the things that we continue to hear and that the task force has been working on with BDC is the need for outdoor seating, for blocking off streets, for parklets. And if you could talk a little bit about that from your perspective and why that's critically important to your success in the near term once we get to stage 2.
Sure. I think this is particularly relevant for those establishments that rely on seating. So for some more casual spots where carry out and delivery are fine, the majority of restaurants do rely on tables and seats and for guests to come in and enjoy their experience there. The outdoor seating component certainly allows for better social distancing. I think that it's critical that Baltimore jumps on this early. As soon as other cities figure out that, hey, this is the clearest solution, there's going to be a mad dash to buy picnic tables or outdoor tents. And then soon we'll have this issue of, yes, we've greenlit this really great project, but case in point with the other examples, we've run out of stuff to buy. But maybe there's an opportunity to employ some of the local mill workers to build tables and make this a true made in Baltimore experience. But I think that restaurant owners are crying for small streets to be blocked off where possible, or to utilize empty parking pads, just any space where it makes sense to safely bring people together. Or even it could be bring your own camp chair, encourage this idea that this is a really a neighborhood community driven event where people just sling their own chair and, just have a good time, just well spaced out, and maybe just tape off some spots on the ground.
Thanks. One of the things that we continue to hear a lot about are delivery services, Grubhub, Uber Eats. There's a variety of them out there. And I was wondering if you could walk us all through how that business model works and
Sure.
what type of changes to that business model would help local restaurants in Baltimore City.
Yep. So I'm sure a majority of you have utilized Grubhub or Uber Eats, DoorDash, or some delivery service similar to that, particularly during this time. And I think it's a phenomenal resource for restaurants and guests to be able to have access to restaurants and getting food conveniently delivered, typically for a small delivery fee. The way that it works from our side is generally we sign contracts, and yes, we do agree to this rate, and there's no wiggle room to typically give away about 30% of our sale to that partnering company, whether that's Grubhub or Uber Eats. The delivery fee also goes to that company, and the tip that you provide also goes to that driver. So generally restaurants see a very small fraction of the sale that actually gets made, because we then hit a number of marketing or partnership fees that they're constantly pitching us on. So it's kind of like spinning wheels. Yes, we're making product and selling it, but at what gain for us? And generally this works well if you have plenty of capacity to be able to execute these orders. So some of the things that we're seeing across the country with some of the bigger cities like Seattle, Jersey, New York City, SF, is a cap on the commission percentage that these services are allowed to charge, capping it around 15% plus a max of 5% for fees like credit card processing or what have you. And so certainly that could be an option here in Baltimore as we look at how restaurants will need to kind of pivot and offer their own in-house delivery, kind of a la New York City 10 years ago when everyone had their own in-house delivery. From our perspective, we've already invested into a number of e-bikes to be able to zip through the city and track down those Domino's guys zipping through as well. And I think it's really great that we have these awesome bike paths to make it a little bit safer for us to do that.
And Phil, have you seen these food delivery services increase their prices since the onset of the pandemic?
I wouldn't say an increase in prices. I think that there's an increase in the a la carte marketing options that they offer. And certainly none of that is free. And they kind of tease you with a free offer, but the big boys always find a way to make a few bucks. There have been some services that have offered deferred commissions, which means that at some point we would owe them in the future. Other partners have lowered some commissions. So I think that there's, hopefully some understanding from these service providers, knowing that their success is contingent on restaurants continuing their service with them. And so, yeah, certainly mixed feelings there. Should local government get involved in this? Are there legal ramifications at some point? I'm sure their lawyers have their ears perked for lawsuits waiting to come down the line. But at the same time, I think the one thing that we do have control over is being able to at least start our own in-house delivery. And that touches on what Senator Hayes was talking about with regards to insurance, with, our staff driving their own cars. I think by nature, small business owners are very entrepreneurial, and we'll hustle the hell out of it to be able to, keep our businesses afloat. The only thing that we can continue to ask and raise our voice about is getting the help where we think it's most necessary.
Got it. And I think, Shalonda, that's something we can certainly take back to the task force.
Absolutely.
Provide guidance to the administration on. Phil, can you talk a little bit about, we've seen a huge push on social media for folks to support small businesses. I know that myself, along with many of the people on this call, try to support our local restaurants when we can. Can you talk about what else customers and patrons can do now and what they can do as we start to reopen?
Yeah, I think it's a number of things. Like you said, just continue to support the small businesses that you love. And sometimes that means spending a few dollars. Sometimes it also just means resharing or reposting something that a small business is really promoting. The viral element of social media is a huge component of our ability to kind of get the word out, since we're missing out on the human contact that we typically see. I mean, on any given day, Doobie's typically sees about 400 guests a day, and now that's dwindled down to about 70 guests, and then 50 delivery drivers. And so I think that that's a huge component. One is I think a lot of our guests in particular have been extra patient and exceedingly kind, and we always appreciate that. A lot of us are understaffing our restaurants, again, to keep social distancing and safety and healthy. It's also a little bit challenging for our employees to want to come back, and the same reasons that anyone may have on a personal level. And so we only ask for just a little bit more patience as we try to get through your orders. To please follow guidelines, whether that's wearing masks or keeping a 6-foot distance. The other challenge will be, how we control a guest count within our restaurants, because it's the first time that we almost need to have a doorman that's counting how many people in and out. If you've gone to a very busy grocery store, we see that there pretty frequently, but then again, those guys are extremely busy right now. So again, just being conscious of your community, of the restaurants that do operate, just be a good guest.
Thanks, Phil. I know we've got a number of questions for Senator Hayes and for you. I'm going to turn it back over to Shalonda so we can get to some of the questions from our audience.
Thank you so much, Councilman and Senator and Phil. Just, I think, very timely to what we're hearing and what we're feeling. At Downtown Partnership, one of the things that we recognize is it is going to take all of us. And so even for us as an organization, we're making sure that we break down the silos. Organizations that, people would sometimes think we're competing with, we recognize, it's not just about our organization, but the whole. And we need people to come back and do it safely. So thank you for your leadership in that, right? One of our first question, Senator, I believe this is more for you, but it's talking about, the question is Maryland writing standard operating procedures on how to keep safe when visiting businesses and going back to work? This is something, whether it's coming from, but everybody is saying, what are sort of the baseline guidelines that we could follow?
Yeah, I think as various parts of the reopening and stuff has been opening, and even during the pandemic, there's been various bulletins that's been posted after those press conferences and briefings that provide guidance. I think that will continue. One of the things that I didn't mention earlier, and I will forward it over to you, Shalonda, so we could get it out to the Downtown Partnership audience. There's, as a part of our briefing materials today, there's about 4 different bulletins that have been issued so far to provide guidance on how to actually implement some of these things for small and local businesses as it relates to health insurance and other things. And so we'll forward that over to you. A good source for me is always going to the Maryland governor's website. There's a lot of great information. Well, a lot of clarity is presented on there about how we go about implementing some of the policies that have been released.
Which is good, thank you. And then, Councilman, I'm thinking that's an opportunity for us to also galvanize a lot of that in the task force where we see some things are not happening, for us to put a stamp on that piece.
Yep.
Phil, I have a question for you, and this is more sort of down the road, blue sky. And it's saying, when you look at the restaurant industry overall, based on some of the things that you talked about, what do you see as some of the sort of big changes that they may end up having to make, similar to, we had tipped employees now who were paid a certain wage, because they would get tips, where that may shift a little bit. Do you see them having to become salaried, or, restaurants looking more like bodegas and selling specialty items? Like, what do you see sort of down the road?
Yeah, so I think it's so challenging to plan for that far in the future. There are a lot of factors that are outside of our scope and out of our control, that we just kind of have to play by ear. So I think that, one, we are conscious of future planning, if that becomes an option for us. A lot of our ability to remain in business, I think, is heavily contingent on, what we do globally in terms of, how to treat or potentially cure or vaccinate against this. At the same time, there are more hyper-localized challenges that we have. What will landlords decide to do? Because they essentially can become this a very helpful partner in this, or they can become this clean axe where we just don't have a shot anymore. I think that part of the reason why you're seeing such a relatively small number of restaurants announcing their full closure is because we're all just waiting on their decision, which is very scary to think about. So when it comes to employee planning and concept planning, everything is play by ear. I mean, 2 months ago, we were operating completely normally, and then within a weekend, we completely pivoted and we found a way to make it somewhat viable. As more government-backed resources, whether it's SBA PPP loan or, again, Baltimore City's potential up to $15,000 grant, whatever that we can utilize and take advantage of and have are all opportunities. And it just opens us up to keep on fighting for another day. And certainly, again, a lot of that is it's on the general public, to keep supporting your favorite small businesses. We're constantly planning for the future, but really looking at what does the next week look like for us, and take it day by day.
No, I think that's absolutely key, which sort of transitions to the next question a little bit. And Senator and Councilman, you may want to chime in on this one, because as we look at restaurants in particular and some of the permitting fees that come along with outside and some other things like that, is the state considering thinking about, suspending or reducing some permitting fees for businesses? Is that something that's on the radar?
I'll let Councilman Costello talk to the permitting fees, but we've already saw on things that the state that fall within our purview, like the registration of commercial vehicles and things like that a lot of businesses use. Those registration dates have been extended, but so I think some more of that will happen as these issues come to light. And so again, I think it's so important that our listening audience, those who are affected, who are running businesses every day, don't assume that your legislators know all of the challenges that you're facing. Reach out to your local legislator on a state or local level to identify some of the issues you're experiencing, so we could consider some of these things in our deliberations. But Councilman, you want to talk about some of the permit fees?
Yeah, absolutely. There's and I'm sure Phil is keenly aware of this as a restaurant owner. There are just a slew of fees and bureaucracy around trying to get outdoor seating. So I can tell you that that's one thing that Mayor Young and his administration are very focused on. I think we're going to see some news in the very near future on that. While I can't really get into the specifics, the focus of the team that's been working on that is around how to provide relief, not only in terms of the fees associated with it, but in terms of kind of the bureaucracy, if you will, the pain of going through the process. Right now, the process to get outdoor seating can take 3 months, which is just completely unacceptable. And, everyone is aware that a lot of these restaurants that we're talking about don't have 3 months to get back up to full capacity or to get back up to even 50 or 60% capacity. So there needs to be changes to that process. I know the mayor and his team have been working very hard on that. And like I said, I think we're going to hear some good news on that front in the very near future.
Thank you so much. Councilman, they talk about it from a state perspective, but the question is it possible for the state to move forward to phase 2 while the city remains, sort of, they have lockdown, but, with our stay-at-home order?
Sure. So anything is possible at this point in time. But this is what I would say to people, this hand being the state, this hand being the city. The one thing that we know for certain is that the city is not going to get ahead of the state. So the city has to follow the state's lead. And the state right now is at phase 1, and eventually they're going to get to phase 2. Now, while we're behind, right now we're behind 4 days, right? So phase 1 started on Friday. Let's say hypothetically that Governor Hogan decided next Friday, 2 weeks from this past Friday, that he's going to move the state to phase 2. The city could automatically jump to phase 2. There's nothing that precludes the mayor from moving ahead more quickly. So, what I would caution people, and I know there's a lot of concern out there about the fact that, we're behind on phase 1, that automatically means that we're going to be behind on phase 2. That's not the case. So, we're going to do everything we can to reopen as quickly as humanly possible while following the guidance of our health professionals that are guiding the mayor and the administration. But just because we're behind now doesn't mean we'll be behind at phase 2 or phase 3. We could be, but it doesn't necessarily mean that.
Thank you so much. This one, and I know we have a part of it, there's a question about, asking if there's a comprehensive list of restaurants and businesses that have closed in the city. I know on our team that Claudia is starting to collect, at least for the downtown area, ones that are closed, so that we can start to map and look at and prepare for that. We're doing a lot now to make sure we are working to support those businesses to help hopefully prevent that from happening. But do you know of anything citywide that's a comprehensive list, and maybe not knowing that's something that we could also sort of put on the list, for the task force to at least consider?
I don't know of anything citywide, but that's something that, as you mentioned, Shalonda, we should certainly talk to the task force about. I suspect that BDC is already starting to track that information, and I turn it over to the senator in case he has anything to add.
Yeah, no, I would just say, Eric, I don't know of any resource. I know Commerce have been trying to work with a lot of small businesses that's dealing with this, but it's going to be even more important, as I believe the feds are going to be rolling out some additional assistance for main streets and some of those small businesses or whatever to look out for and identify what businesses still need help. But there's no stagnant list that I'm aware of right now.
So thank you on this. This next one is definitely a little bit more in the innovative space around how cities are looking to flatten the curve. And so the question is, will the city be able to provide masks to residents? And they referenced that Rochester, New York mailed out 5 masks to 96,000 families. I know that in part of the reason, I know the city right now is trying to make sure they can even get PPE for the essential staff, the workers, the police, the hospital right now. So I don't know that it's been on the radar yet, but do you have any sort of insight to that, Councilman?
As you mentioned, Shalonda, right now the focus is on ensuring that our frontline responders, whether that's fire, police, our sanitation workers, our health inspectors, our folks that are working to clean up our parks, do have that PPE so that they can safely do their job. We do have a number of partnerships with nonprofit organizations that are distributing masks. I know Senator Hayes was with me a couple weeks ago. We were up on Pennsylvania Avenue distributing masks to residents. So there are a number of groups throughout the city that are doing great work around that. I don't know that it's necessarily been discussed as a citywide initiative, but we can certainly bring that back to the health commissioner for her consideration.
Right. And Shalonda, I think, and this Antonio, I think it's also important that we recognize that, you know, as we try to prepare some of our first responders and government people, that the requirement is not actually a mask. Face coverings are also effective way to help flatten the curve or whatever. And so one of the things we've been trying to do, even people that don't have access to masks, is use some type of covering over their nose and mouth to help with the pandemic as it goes on. And so I think many people throughout Baltimore and throughout our state have found some really creative ways in how to protect themselves and protect the general public, and we encourage them to continue to do so.
Thank you for all of that. Councilman, before we shift to some of the closing things, I don't know if you want to extend it for some final comments.
No, I really appreciate Senator Hayes and Phil. Senator, I know you're incredibly busy. You've been a tremendous partner to me and to the downtown community. So thank you for everything you do. Phil, you're running 5 or 6 businesses. Can't tell you how much we appreciate what you're doing for our city and our neighborhoods, and that you took time out of your busy schedule to join us this morning. Shalonda, back to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for this. We're getting great response for Downtown Download, keeping this every Tuesday at 9 a.m. I do want to do a special thanks, especially since I have a few board members. I want to send a shout out to my board chair, my interim board chair, Mark Wasserman. Thank you for your leadership on this. Councilman and Senator, both as board members on there, just making sure that we stay true to our mission and that we're really fulfilling the need. And I also see another board member on the line, Terry Harrington. And so I just want to give kudos for just having an engaged board that's really focused on us protecting not just downtown, our city and everything. And so that's very helpful. I want to ask people to tune in next week. We do have Delegate Brooke Learman coming on, so that should be also exciting. She's really focusing that one on the arts. And so we'll have Nicholas Cohen, the executive director from Maryland Citizens for the arts. And then we'll also be joined by BOPA with Donna joining us as well. And so we really look forward to having a power-packed conversation around that piece. Really want to make sure that this is staying relevant. It's needed, and we can tell by your attendance that it is. We're also going to just ask in the interim if there are topics that you want us to consider. Please send them to info@godowntownbaltimore.com, please, because we want to make sure that we are responding to your needs. And then we also have on the site just a full list of COVID resources on the website, social media, with all of that. Through our hashtag Curbside Baltimore initiative, you can see restaurants who are, doing some curbside pickups and also support some others while you can. And so on that is the end that I have there. Thank you to the team, Mike, Lauren, Nicole, and everybody who's on the line. Could not do this without you. Like getting through this, it's a team effort. So have a good day.